Good afternoon, everyone. 10 Paths to God, Ladies Lunch and Learn class is dedicated in loving memory Lili Nishmat Frida Bluma Bat Shimshon Meir and Chaya Sarah Bat Aaron Yaakov by Chaya and Shimi Deutscher. Neshamot should have an Aliyah. Okay, so we're at part 4 of the 10 Paths to God, which is kind of crazy because I feel like we just started. This means that we're like halfway through the summer already. God willing, we're getting closer to the end. So if you've noticed, what we've been doing here is we've been cherry picking different. Rabbi Sacks is cherry picking different concepts within Judaism that are often misunderstood. He highlights them, refocuses our attention on what it is that we're supposed to be thinking about, the kavanot behind it. And more importantly, he's hoping that you're somewhat inspired to walk away with a deeper sense of appreciation for your Jewishness. Now, I say it like that because I would argue that most Jews have gone through what I call collective amnesia, right? They don't really know what it means to be Jewish. Because, and I may have said this to this group before, but there's two kinds of people. There are, and I'm oversimplifying it, of course there's more kinds of people. There's two kinds of people. There are fans and players. Okay, the fans are the people that are the cheerleading in the background, like they're very excited. And then there are the people that are actually playing the game. But for most Jews that I have met, they're proud to be Jewish, but as an observer, as an outsider. Oh yeah, it's really nice. It's great. Oh, it's awesome that you go to synagogue. It's awesome that you keep kosher. It's beautiful that you do Shabbat. Well, that's not for me. But Judaism doesn't survive with fans, right? It survives with players. A sport does not have a future without any players. And therefore, when we think about our Judaism, do we think of it as an inheritance? Something that was just passed down to us, and therefore, I don't take my inheritance seriously because it's something that I just received. I didn't have to work hard for it. It's something I just got. I had no choice, but I had to take this from my parents. It's what they gave me. Or do we relate to our Judaism as something that's alive, unreal, something that I need to care for, like a relationship? A relationship requires effort, energy. Any relationship that is meaningful requires constant effort, energy, refinement, constant. And the second you stop, the whole thing starts falling apart. There is no scenario where anyone sits by idly waiting for something to develop and get better over time. That's not the way the world works. The world works the opposite way. The nature of the world is that if you allow things to remain idle, it will degrade itself. It gets worse over time. It does not get better over time. And therefore, if you are not constantly putting in the effort to support, encourage, cultivate, create, develop, whatever it is, it's going to fade away. And therefore, when we talk about our Judaism, I think of it exactly the same way. So I would argue that for most guys, for guys it's a little bit easier. Why? Because I have to be in synagogue every single day. I have to learn every single day. And therefore, there's an emphasis on me understanding why I do what I do and so on and so forth. For women, they don't have the same obligation, but that doesn't mean that they don't have the responsibility, right? There's something called mitzvot, right? A mitzvah. The word mitzvah comes from the word tzaveh, a commandment, right? Why do these things have to be commanded to us? Why is Judaism presented as a command? Do this or else. And if that's how you relate to it, how do you try to inspire your children that you got to do this because it's a mitzvah? You're commanded to do it. Because if that's how you relate to your Judaism, you're in trouble. And your kids and your grandkids, it's troubling. So you got to upgrade it. So let's help you upgrade it today, Bezrat Hashem. Okay? So God sees us as partners. He created a world where humanity was given the opportunity to elevate itself, to become godly by partnering with God. There is no other group of people on the planet that can tell the story that we as Jews tell. If you think of it, for every single one Jew on the planet, there are about 150 Christians. For every one Jew on the planet, there's about 122 Muslims. Right? No, there's more Christians still. Right? So that's crazy. Right? It's a crazy number. Why would God want to work with a small group of people? Right? If you had a mission of inspiring the world to be more godly, you'd go to a group of people that had better numbers. We don't have good numbers. Numbers don't really look in our favor. And unfortunately, if you follow the statistics like I do, right, and you think about it or obsess about it like I do, then you know that in about 30 years in this country, the numbers are going to get smaller. Right? We're going to lose about 50% of the Jews in this country in the next 30 years. Right? And that number might accelerate in time because of what the last 10 years looked like. Well, and this has been our case. This has been the story of our people since its inception. Right? The first person, Avraham Avinu, right? He is dealing with Jewish identity and continuity. Right? He has no kids. And then when he has a kid, right, Yitzchak, he's looking for a shidduch for a long time. He's trying to find. He's only 37 years old, right? When he gets onto the Akedah, and 40 when he gets married. He's an old guy already.
Who's this?
Yitzchak. Yeah. So Avram was concerned. Hashem, you promised me that you're going to make me into a great nation, right? You're going to fill the earth, like the stars of the heavens, the sand of the dust of the earth, and nothing happened. What's going on? So this concept of Jewish numbers has always been an issue, because Judaism understands more than anyone, it's not about quantity, it's about quality. The quality of the person matters more. You're all familiar with the 80-20 principle, that 80% of all the work is done by 20% of all the people. So they've just figured out that number is wrong. It's 1%, it's 99%, 1%. 99% of all the work is really happening by 1% of the people. 99% of all the creativity is happening by 1% of all the people. Right? It's tiny. The number is tiny, which makes a lot of sense, because as Jews, we make up less than 1% of the world population. Right? I think we're 0.25% of the world population. Right? 0.25%. So it makes sense that we take a lion's share of that whole entire 1%. Of creativity. It's coming from you and your people. Now, why? Where does it come from? So the first thing is, yes? You have a question?
Yes. I wanted to say that different than other cultures, they disappear.
Yes.
But Judaism hasn't.
It has and it hasn't. Parts of it has, right? Unfortunately.
It has, because maybe we have more troubles than other cultures.
It's interesting, because when I look at history, and I think of it from, the destruction of the first temple, the second temple, 2,000 years in exile. So we have a long history, sample size to look at, right? In America, the story is different. It was true that like if you're from Iraq or from Syria or Egypt, right? Lebanon, or Afghanistan, Uzbekistan, all the Iran, all those countries had a Judaism that survived for 2,000 years, right? But that's not true in America. In America, the Jews, no, but America has Jews coming to this country close to 450 years. And we don't know where they are. They're gone. They've assimilated, they're out. Right, so the story is changing. So while it's true, there should be a very powerful Spanish-Portuguese community in this country. Where is the Spanish-Portuguese mikvah? Where is the Spanish-Portuguese yeshiva? Where's the Spanish-Portuguese, there should be lots of them. They've been here for so long, a massive community. 500 years is a long time, right? You have Jews that left Spain in the 1500s and started other communities like in Poland, and 500 years later, you have 3 million Jews living there. There should be something like 30 million Jews in America. 30 million in America. If we just did the numbers the way we did it everywhere else in Europe. But I'm not talking about only Jews that came 500 years ago, but there have been Jews that have been immigrating to this country for the last 400 years. Right? In the last 100 years, there are close to 6 million Jews that came to this country. And we only have 5 million Jews in this country right now. I'm saying the Holocaust was nothing. Nothing. 6 million is nothing. They call it, in America, they call it the silent Holocaust. Silent Holocaust. 30 million Jews or gone. Gone. Yeah.
But isn't it true that if somebody marries a non-Jew, like there's this whole discrepancy about that, and
Yeah.
I think that's an issue, because
The question is, why is it happening now? Why is it?
If a woman gets married to a non-Jew, the kids are Jewish.
I understand.
Yeah, it's true, but if
But if it's opposite is the problem.
it's true, but
Is it a problem?
no, it's not a question of problem or not. The question is, what do the children identify as? Right? If the children no longer identify, they might be halachically Jewish, which is awesome, high five, but if you don't identify as being Jewish, it's irrelevant.
But I think people frown
And I-
on that,
and
that's a big problem.
Yeah, no,
Jewish, it counts also.
there could be something like, they say there's like 50 million Jews on planet Earth that are halachically Jewish, but they don't identify as being Jewish. Right? So you're probably right. But that's very nice. That doesn't help me. Right? And all too often, those people end up becoming your greatest adversary, not your greatest helper. So all too often, those Jews in particular that are so far from their Judaism, they're the ones that make it the most difficult for Jews. Right? So, but why does that happen? Why does it happen? Let's talk about that for a minute. Why is it that you have a generation of Jews that come here, right? And then a generation later, they're already out. They're gone. What happens? What does that look like? Right? Now the truth is that I would say, this is me, my personal experience. Forget about statistics and data. My experience was like this. My parents came from Israel to this country in the 1970s. Okay, they were very secular, did not have religion growing up. No kosher, no Shabbat, nothing. They were proud Zionists, as was I, because that's what I saw at home. And we had like a Shabbat thing, we had like a meal, usually Domino's, and then it was like TGIF. We watched whatever shows were on Friday night as a family. Thank God it's Friday. And then Shabbat day was Saturday morning cartoons, and then I'd go out with my friends, and that was my Shabbat, right? But it was Shabbat. I called it Shabbat, but that was my Shabbat. There was nothing more than that. There was nothing meaningful there on Shabbat. I didn't relate or identify with anything beyond that, right? Pesach was beautiful, right? We had a meal with all the family together. We had matzot even, right? And then the next day I'd go to the car show, at Jacob Javits Center, and get bagels, lox, and cream cheese because it was Pesach. It was just a different world, and like it wasn't because they were malicious or they weren't anti anything Jewish. They just didn't know. They didn't have an education. They didn't know any better. And that was the story from most Jews. And I would say the last 100 years, right, we've seen this story over and over again. And it's very simple. The world changed, right?
Do you think in Israel there's an intentional separation? Like, no, I'm not like those religious Jews. So they're intentionally being less religious.
I think in Israel it's a bit more. There are a lot more nuances, and that there are some people like that. But I would say most of the people are not like that. I'd say for the majority of people are not like thinking I'm trying to. Even a secular person still has pride in his story, in his history, in his legend. You want to call it? They're not like, they recognize that there's meaning in ceremony and holiday, and like, it's just they see that. Even secular Jews see that. Most Jews are not anti, most secular Jews are not anti,
That's an environment where they're not really intermarrying.
Right. So Israel's unique in that sense that they still were able to have that. They have that there, but it's changing in Israel also. Many Jews are leaving Israel right now. Right. The rate I think in Los Angeles alone, forget about America, there's something like 300,000 Israelis in California. Just in California alone. Forget about the rest of the United States. They say there's something like 700,000 Israelis in America, in North America, between America and Canada. Right? Because business and whatever it is that are traveling and so on and so forth, right? That's a crazy number. Considering you have such a small population, you only have that's like 10%. Almost of the Israelis leave Israel and just come to North America. That's a large number. What's that? You have a lot of?
We have a lot of Israelis in Virgin Arab.
I'm sorry. No, I'm just joking. I'm just joking. Yeah.
A lot of Israelis.
Yeah, the lockdowns were draconian. They had a hard time with it, 100%. No question about it.
Question, do we want people
No. We're happy to, I mean, depends which community you're in. It's a sore subject here. But what's that? We discourage. We could. If I could start like a mega church, it'd be packed. Packed. Rabbi Fari, if I got Rabbi Fari and like our team here to start like we go out west and we take our show on the road, packed. Be rich. Make so much money instead of here with you guys. Joking. What's that? No, if I was encouraging, if I took what we teach here on a rodeo, we'd kill it. It'd be amazing, right? No, but I don't want that. I don't want that. The reason why I don't want that is because I want the most intelligent, soul-searching people to join my people. Because what ends up happening is if you end up creating a religion of just inspiration, which is what I think is required to move people, right? Then you end up with people like you end up with a religion like Christianity, right? There's no real depth. It's a superficial.
I feel like some people who converted are so into it, and some people who aren't.
The people that I'm watching convert right now are coming from Christian families, and most of them down south. There is a huge movement in the Christian world in the South right now where they're going to church on Friday nights and they're singing Lecha Dodi from an Art Scroll Siddur. And I couldn't believe this stuff. I couldn't make this stuff up. And they're having sermons and classes at school coming from the Old Testament because they don't know, they're looking for meaning and it's very hard to teach it. But they're keeping them Christian. They're not encouraging them to convert. So the smart ones, right, are the ones that are saying, I want more. I realize that I could have a relation with Hashem up until some point. But if you really want a relation with Hashem, you got to become Jewish. Why? Because Jews have this thing called mitzvot. A commandment, a mitzvah, right? So let's talk about how we relate to the commandment, right? The commandment is, the way I see it is like this. There's relationships, right? And relationships are challenging. My wife and I were married for 25 years, Baruch Hashem. And it's not always a walk in the park, right? It's hard sometimes. It's annoying sometimes. I don't get what I want, right? Things are not done the way I want them to be done. Breakfast isn't ready as soon as I walk into when I come back from the morning. Whatever it is, like you each have a preconceived notion of what a relationship ought to look like, and then you have reality, right? The reality of the situation that you're in. And you have a choice to make, right? Do you just get up and walk away? Or are you willing to put the effort and engage in developing this thing and making it more meaningful? So the way I think of mitzvot is exactly this. Mitzvot is my way of knowing what my spouse likes and does not like. It's the conversation we had about do it like this and not like that. It's the attempt to do things that allow me to draw closer to the other person. That's what a mitzvah is. When God says, keep Shabbat, is this intention to create a reality where you're stuck at home and feel like you're suffering because you forgot to turn on the AC, and now it's hot outside, and like you're not sure what to do? Does God really care? It's Shabbat. It's really so rational. Like, what does He really want me to do, right? Is it about kosher? There's this place. It's around the corner. It's open. Everyone's eating there, but it's not kosher. But it's just I'll just eat the salad, and we start doing all kinds of things. Now, in a relationship, if we play that game, we get in trouble. Right? If with your spouse, you start, or child even, you start rationalizing what you want to do versus what you know that other person wants to do, that's where you get into trouble. So why does God want us to do these things? Let's talk about the idea of Kiddusha for a moment. What is holiness and why is it important? I would say the first time you encountered true Kiddusha was Shabbat, part of it, right? But that wasn't really much of a choice growing up because your families, communities, whatever. But I'd say if you got married, that was the first time you experienced Kiddusha. What does it look like, okay? It's like this. You're standing on the chuppah, and your spouse is saying, Harei amekudeshet li, will you be consecrated to me with this ring? You're standing there receiving your ring in your index finger. At that moment, when you receive that ring, that is where the sanctity of marriage comes from. Because what really happens at that moment is you are saying to the other, I am to you and to you alone. And vice versa. The sanctity of marriage comes from two people agreeing that they are prohibiting themselves from everyone else on the planet and permitting themselves to each other. The separation that you create on the wedding day is where the kedusha of marriage comes from. Shabbat, what makes Shabbat holy, is the fact that I am separating what my Shabbat looks like. The 25 hours of my Shabbat experience is 25 hours very different than whatever my week looks like, my chol, right? So it's me. I create the sanctity of Shabbat. There is an intrinsic holiness of the day. This is how I'm supposed to celebrate it. But if I'm not doing things to experience that Shabbat, I'm not going to feel it. How many times have people told you, I don't feel it. I don't connect to it. You know why you don't connect to it? You know why you don't feel it? Because you ain't doing anything for it. Every single kid in my house has a chore for Shabbat throughout the week. You got to do something. I don't care when it's done. These are your chores. You're doing this for Shabbat. This one's cutting the toilet paper. This one's getting the flowers. This one's setting the table. This one's doing the candles. This is making the salads. Everyone's got something that they're doing for Shabbat. Because when you invest in something, that's where the meaning comes from. Like we said earlier, like any relationship, you want it to be meaningful, you got to put the effort in, right? If there's no effort, my wife's family is from India. They moved from Iraq, and they moved to India. And when you move to India about 70 years ago, or maybe even 80 years ago now, the first thing you did when you got there is you got help because it was so cheap. You got lots of it. I'm not sure if you've been there, but in India, you have there's no help wanted signs anywhere. Help wanted signs anywhere. Okay, you go to the bar, you have one guy smiles and says, hello sir, what can I get you? And you say, I want this drink. He looks over, he tells the guy over there, the next guy gives you a glass, the next guy gives you a napkin, the next guy gives you ice, the next guy pours in the drink, the other guy puts in a straw with an umbrella, the last guy says, have a nice day. Right? I'm not joking, that's what it's like going, but when you're in that environment and you have everyone doing everything for you, right? It's very easy, very quickly, that your children have nothing to do for Shabbat. There's zero engagement. My father-in-law, when he went to school every single day, he has two brothers. There was three of them. Each of them had their full-time personal servant. Okay, and when they went to school every day, the servant would get on the bus, okay, with a bag, okay, filled with ingredients, pots and pans. He'd go to the school, off school grounds, start a little fire, and cook a meal for him so he could have a fresh lunch every single day. He doesn't know how to boil water, right? He doesn't know how to make himself a cup of tea, right? He's so removed. So in that world, it very quickly, kids who have a very strong tradition for 2,000 years, right? Jews from the 1st century until about the 12th century, every Jew on the planet, every Jew went to yeshiva in Iraq. Everyone did. In France, in Germany, in Italy, in Spain, everyone went to Iraq to yeshiva. There was only one yeshiva in the world. And then slowly it changed, with times of the Rambam and so on and so forth, 12th century, 13th century, that's when Rashi and his kids, the Tosfot, started changing. They started building yeshiva for the first time in Europe. But before that, talking about a community that was around for so long, in one generation, wiped out, gone. There's small pockets of Iraqi communities left.
Is that the time of the Ben Ish Chai?
The Ben Ish Chai was the last of the epicenter of that generation. Yeah, my wife's great-great-grandfather. It's the Ben Ish Chai. It's over. It was gone. Everything that was beautiful, what they cherished, one generation, gone already. Why? Because the system that was in place for so long came to an end, right? You had what I called Judaism through osmosis. You learned about your Judaism from watching it at home, but then you had the Industrial Revolution coming along and it changed everything. You know the first thing the Industrial Revolution did? It got you to rethink anything your parents told you. Because they're part of the old guard. They don't understand technology. So whatever information they had to pass on was no longer relevant. It was outdated. So we questioned everything they told us. In the 1970s in this country, the FDA encouraged women to stop nursing their children. Instead, use baby formula. It's healthier, it's better. We know better. You want to know why so many kids today have issues with like wheat or lactose issue or allergies? It's because their moms were not, we know that for a fact. For whatever reason, if a mother can't do it, she can't do it. But when you're not nursing a kid, your kids are more likely to develop all kinds of allergies and stomach issues. There's something about a natural form of food that is not engineered by a bunch of guys in a lab with a chutzpah to tell people that this is better, right? It's just a side point that I want to get to the sheet, which I just think it's interesting. There's 2 times in history where humanity challenged God publicly that I'm aware of. The first time was with the Titanic. Before the Titanic sailed out, the New York Times headline was, "A ship that God can't sink." Okay. The second time it happened was in the 90s with the Challenger. Right? Even God can't stop this mission. Right? I don't know about 9/11. I'm just saying, as far as like 2 times where there's explicit, something about God not being able to, boom, the exact opposite happened. Right? So it's there. There's something there. We all know that it's there. It's hard for us to articulate it. It's hard for us to always like see it and feel it, but I'm telling you it's there. So when we talk about mitzvah, we're talking about how we're responding to God. That's what we want. How are you responding to God? So the idea of having a mezuzah in the house, the idea of kashrut, the idea of Shabbat is really just about the response. Because what does God ultimately want? What does God really want? You know what He really wants? He wants you to be happy. And you know where happiness really comes from? Because we misunderstand happiness. We mistaken happiness with pleasure. We think that happiness is pleasure, but happiness is not pleasure. Do you know what happiness really is at its core? Happiness is the knowledge that you are doing what you're meant to be doing. That's real happiness. Not going out on vacation and having fun. That's a different kind of happiness. That's more of like pleasure. But the simcha that we talk about as Jews, that happiness comes from me knowing that I'm exactly where I'm meant to be and I'm doing exactly what I'm supposed to be doing. That's real simcha. So the mitzvot are there to challenge you, to give you the opportunity to, hey, now I have a set of rules, a guide, that allows me to respond to every single scenario that I could find myself in a way that allows me to express the best parts of who I am. Honoring your parents, caring for your community, chesed, the charity, giving, being part of it, building the community, education, learning, not just wasting time. Everything is meaningful. Getting up and doing things, standing up for social justice when you see injustice in the world. All those things are very deeply Jewish principles, right? But they require 2 things. One is education, and number 2, dedication. Because everyone here will tell me, of course, Rabbi, I believe that education is the most important value, and education. But I suspect that what you think is education is really not education. Most people that I speak to, when they talk about education for their children, they're really talking about something else. Ready? Where was I? I was in not Costa Rica. I was in Costa Rica also, but I was in Colombia for Pesach, and I got into a fascinating conversation with a bunch of guys. And someone there, who was the president of a prestigious yeshiva in Brooklyn, I said something like, the yeshivas don't prepare children for life. He's like, well, at my yeshiva we do. And I started laughing. I'm like, no, they don't. I said, mechila, they don't. I said, at best, your yeshiva, prepares your children for a career. But don't tell me they're preparing them for life, because they're not. A career is not what education is about. To go to school, I want my kids to get an education. I want them to be knowledgeable about everything. But I know that education in university is never going to teach them about how to be a great father or a great mother. It's not going to ensure that they're going to have great relationships or build family or how to raise children. It's not there. That's a whole other skill set. It's something that universities are not teaching today. Probably the most important parts of life are not being taught in universities today. It's only about making money. How many times the kids will tell me, Rabbi, what degree should I get? How much money will I make? The purpose of an education is to learn to think critically. We don't have that anymore in universities anymore. It's over. No one wants you to think anymore. Just respond. I teach at say that again? Google it, or Google it, even better. I teach at Baruch twice a week during the semester for a Jewish club at the Hillel. And we just finished, the last class I gave was in June. In May, they were still asking me for my COVID card. In COVID card, you cannot enter the campus without a COVID vaccine card. This is in May. So I said to the guy, I said, listen, I have it here, but it's like 4 years old already. He's like, I'm sorry, these are the rules, sir. I need to see the card. What's that? That's the school's policy. The school's policy. It's crazy. This is CUNY. This is a city college, and this is happening everywhere. Just like people, you're not, and I look and I laugh at it. It's a joke. It's a joke. But people aren't thinking anymore. It's about compliance. Comply. Yeah. It's also a form of brainwashing. Okay. It's a serious brainwashing. Let's do this. Number one, Letter in the Scroll. This is, first of all, Letter in the Scroll is a great short book that was written by Rabbi Jonathan Sacks. So this is what he says. Most of the commandments fall into one of three categories. There are those loosely called mishpatim, judgments. These include all the detailed provisions of civil and criminal law, the rules of reciprocal altruism, distributive justice that make of Judaism's social legislation. Then there are chukim, statutes, such as the laws against eating milk and meat together, or wearing clothes of mixed wool and linen. These are sometimes thought of as commandments that have no reason. Rambam rightly dismisses this idea. Essentially, chukim, he says, are laws embedded in nature. And by keeping them, we respect the integrity of the natural world. So we do not combine animal wool and vegetable linen, textiles and mixed animal life, milk with animal death, meat. Behind these and other such commands in the idea that God is a creator of biodiversity rather than a hybrid uniformity. By observing them, we acquire the habits of treating animals with kindness and the environment with care. Judaism's ecological imperative is a delicate balance between mastering and subduing nature, and serving and protecting it. So we have laws against needless waste, the destruction of species, and the despoilation of overexploitation of the environment. The general principle is that we are guardians of the world for the sake of future generations. The other cluster of commands, known as edot, or testimonies, have to do with our identity as part of a people and its story. So on Pesach, we return to Egypt, eating the bread of affliction and bitter herbs of slavery. On Shavuot, we are at Sinai, hearing the Ten Commandments and sharing in the covenant. And on Sukkot, we reenact the Israelites' journey across the desert with only a hut for a home. Festivals are the supreme transformation of history into memory, from events in distant past into the personal experience of the present. When I observe the festivals, I know more powerfully than in any other way that I am not a disconnected atom. I am a letter in the scroll, not yet complete, written by my ancestors whose past lives in me, on in me. How beautiful is that? Meaning, Judaism is not a philosophy, of ancient philosophy that is no longer relevant. Judaism is a living expression of a truth that depends on your participation. When you are celebrating Pesach, Sukkot, Hanukkah, Purim, all those holidays, you're a link in that chain of the story, right? It's not just, we're not talking about, it's not Santa Claus on Christmas coming down the chimney. Did you know that Santa Claus was invented by Coca-Cola? By Coca-Cola.
What?
Yep. Santa Claus, the picture of St. Nicholas, the guy with the white and red, that whole thing is from the marketing department of Coca-Cola. That's their colors, right? That's their colors. Anyway, so you have a. I'm not talking about fairy tales in Judaism. I'm talking about history, and you're a part of that history. You're a part of that story, right? There is no word for history in Hebrew. We talk about it as memory, zachor, remember. History is an English word. Historia in Hebrew is an English word. There is no ancient word in Hebrew that describes a past except for our memory. We talk about it as our memory because you are an extension of your pasts. And when we are celebrating and learning together like this, coming together as a community, we're part of this story that's still alive. It's powerful. You could understand now why the Jews who were exiled twice had the chutzpah to come back and reclaim their homeland, right? Jews who were exiled and unable to have equal rights and opportunities for the last 2,000 years of our history, still found a way to build community and care for the poor. They still found a way to educate both male and female. They still went out of their way. They went out of their way to go ahead and try to contribute as best as they can to be model citizens. That came from them having this deep connection to our past and understanding that it's not just a story that was, but I, like you, are responsible for continuing telling that story. And we tell that story by living the story. It's alive, right? So Pesach has meaning. It's powerful. We're starting the book of Devarim this week, and we know the book of Devarim is the last book of the 5 books, and it's mostly Moses reviewing so much of what was told, right? How does the parsha begin? Yeah, that what? Asher, Diber, Moshe, to El Kol Bnei Israel, right? El Kol Bnei Israel, right? And this week begins with and Moses. These are the words of Moses that he imparted to all the Jewish people. So 2 questions. Number 1, why does it have to say all the Jewish people? Why the word Kol? Just tell me these El Dvarim, right? Asher Diber Moshe, El Bnei Israel. Obviously, it's all the Jewish people. Why Kol?
Maybe including all the other Egypt.
But even Erev Rav is still part of Israel, so just say Israel. We don't say Kol. Who else is it including? That's number 1. Number 2 is, wasn't this guy Moses, the guy in Exodus and Shemot, who said, that what?
That he's
Ani aral safatayim. Ani ish lo ish dvarim anochi. I'm not a man of words. So here he is, 40 years later. He's got a lot to say. So what happened? So Chachamim tell us that when you're someone who is constantly involved in your mitzvot and learning, it teaches you how to speak and how to express yourself. Here you have a man he was a stammerer. He could not communicate. The Maharal asks, why did God choose Moshe to teach the Torah? If you're going to have someone who's supposed to give over what we call a Torah Shabbal Peh, an oral tradition, you find the best orator you can. Get someone with a nice British accent, who's clear, who could express and enunciate every single, no slurring, someone who could speak beautifully. Hire that guy to give the Torah. Why would you hire Moshe? It's a weird thing. So you know what he says? What's that? Yeah, but so what? But so let him get like a speaker for him. Like you get someone else, like a mouthpiece, like you have like the state secretary, you have someone else who comes out and he's the orator for Moshe. Why does Moshe have to teach it?
Because Moshe was born for this.
It's just true, all true, but doesn't answer the question, right? So I'll tell you his answer. Oh, you're very close. So the Maharal says that the reason why is so that when you spoke to Moshe, you couldn't hear a word he said. What did you say again? Would you have to wait for him to like break his teeth to like say it? But when Moshe taught Torah, it was super clear. At any time they heard Moshe speak, they knew it wasn't him, it was God. He was a perfect agent for it. His disability is what gave him the ability to be that communicator. No one questioned it. But now at the end of it, after 40 years of exercising his mouth and lips, he has his own words. So who is he speaking to? Why Kol? So the Chachamim tell us that Kol is everyone, including you and me. He was speaking to every generation of Jews, not just the generation in the desert. And this is why our Mekubalim tell us that if you actually read the book of Devarim as a book that was written for you, make it personal, you will hear something unique for you and only you, that only you can hear in the Parshiyot coming up over the next 10 weeks, Devarim, right?
In 70 languages.
That's right, it was in 70 languages also, but I'm saying something different. I'm saying that the Psukim are not like any other Psukim. Chachamim tells you have to take one book with you, because you want to, over the summer, they always take Devarim, just one book. Devarim is the best Sefer and Musar of character development. And again, if you think of the book as a personal story, a personal message, like Moshe is your coach, teaching you these words, talking to you, make it personal, you will find something profound that will forever change your life. And what a loss. Here's a book that was written for you in mind. So spend some time going through it. Pick up a Chumash, go through even a Rashi with it, and I'm telling you, you'll walk away a different person. You'll be an elevated person. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehakol niyeh b'dvaro. Today is? Oh wow. Okay, awesome. I did not know that. Yeah. Today's Hilula of Rashi. You know that we don't know where Rashi is buried. I guess we know where his Hilula is. I don't know. We don't know where he is. We don't know. He's most of the rabbis that are Rishonim that died in Europe. We have no idea where they are. And if you were a rabbi that lived in Spain, any point from the 1st century up to the 15th century, we have no idea where you are. You're lost.
Rashi is from France, right?
Rashi was from France. Yeah, northern France. Anyway, okay, fine. So one last piece over here about this idea of mitzvot. What do we call it when we give an explanation for a mitzvah? Anyone know? When we give a reason for a mitzvah, what do we call it? Would you say? A what? No. Halacha is the application of the law, right? So what is when we give a reason for a mitzvah? What do we call it? A ta'am. A ta'am. Ta'ameh ha-mitzvot. The reason for the mitzvot, right? But what does the word ta'am mean? That's right, taste. So what's the correlation between taste and reason? Well, the first thing is that when the Chachamim taught us ta'ameh ha-mitzvot, the reason for the mitzvot, they wanted to remind you, my friends, is that this is just a small taste. You're just getting the ta'am. You're not getting the full experience. This is one small explanation for a mitzvah. So, do I keep kosher because it's a healthier diet? Definitely not. Right? It's not a healthier diet. I'd be like, definitely not a healthier diet, right? So, I was just a couple of days ago, I was in Wolf and Lamb for a lunch. Someone took me out, and I saw this Oriental couple that was there, and I was thinking, like, why would they want to eat here? It makes absolutely no sense. Like, you could go to if you're Chinese, you could literally eat anywhere. It's a lot cheaper, probably even better. But it's part of that, experience of, kosher food, sitting there with people and so on and so forth, right? But yeah, it's definitely not better, right? So why do I keep kosher? Because it's not about better. It's about something else. It's about me recognizing and believing there's an infinite source in the universe that has a deep understanding of every aspect, every atom in my body, and he's saying, you eat this way. Now, I will concede that a lot of what's happening in kosher today is not what God wants from us, right? No question about it. So even the way in which like some of the shchitot are done and like what's happening in like slaughterhouses, I don't think that's what's supposed to happen. And I think even on some level that like Rav Kook, who was a very big believer in like being a vegetarian, I think that at the core that's what Judaism wants. However, not at the expense of us not working on a relationship with humanity. The challenge with like veganism as a philosophy is that it forces us to spend more time thinking about our adorable animals in the world and not enough about humanity. So I'm more concerned about saving the dolphins than I am the people around me. And Rav Kook said that the problem with vegetarianism, which is why, by the way, he always ate meat on Shabbat. Even though he was a vegetarian, he ate meat on Shabbat. And he had a little bit of chicken or fish, whatever, on Shabbat. But he said, look, the problem with it is that you might start believing that we don't need to be mitaken, that we don't need to fix our relationship with humanity. All we got to take care of is the animals. And you see this. There are groups around the world today that are more concerned about animal rights than they are human rights. There's a group of people right now in California that are trying to get voting rights for orangutans because they have an IQ that's higher than people there are some people with Down syndromes, right? And that's an IQ of under 64, right? And I think that orangutans have an IQ of 64, right? And since a Down syndrome person technically could vote, why can't an orangutan vote?
Wow. Dolphins also have very high.
I don't know what it is. Anyway, Kitsu is the Majnun. Yeah.
I have a question before we have next.
Yeah, sure.
The wool and the linen, and then I come here, my friend Yossi shared with me an article
Yeah.
about wool and linen, because our body, the measurement is in angstrom. It's between 70 to 100 angstrom. It's the measurement of our energy. If a person gets sick, this becomes 50 and below. So now they made a test. This just came like February and March. I can send you the article.
Yeah, I'd love to see it.
And it says, like, the wool, it vibrates to 5,000 angstrom.
Okay.
Linen vibrates also to 5,000.
Oh, it cancels zero out.
Is,
Oh, interesting.
polyester is also zero. Silk is 10%.
Interesting. From a the best explanation, the best ta'am I saw for wool and linen comes from Rav Hirsch, Shamshon Hirsch. Rav Hirsch, in his commentary on Chumash, says that I can't believe it's so late already. That this is just an introduction. Was that the reason why we don't mix these two, wool and linen, is because you're taking two different forces that are opposites. The linen represents a plant life. The wool represents animal life. All right, and and those two energies are energies that require very specific type of cultivation, and we don't want to mix them. This is what Cain and Hevel happened, right? Cain and Hevel. This is where that idea of Cain and Hevel, one was a shepherd and one was a farmer. That mixture is what causes some kind of negative force in the world, and therefore God says, don't do it. Right? But interestingly, the only person that could actually wear wool and linen is the Kohen and the Kohen Gadol. Right? So there's a whole other explanation why he can, but not for now. All right, anyway, let's keep going. Number 2, a letter in the scroll, page 120. The word tzedakah is usually translated as charity. I'm going to try to do this very quickly, but in fact it means social or distributive justice. Biblical law, it involved a whole series of institutions that together constituted the first ever attempt at welfare state. This concerns the concern of a field that dropped a sheaf of grapes and olives left from the first picking were to be left for the poor. Right? No one speaks about caring for the poor more so than the Torah. A tith, maaser, was given to them in certain years. Every 7th year, debts were canceled. Slaves went free. No work was done on the land. The produce of the fields belonged to everyone. In the 50th year, the Jubilee, anyone who had been forced through poverty to sell ancestral land was given back. So the Bible's welfare legislation, is built on the premise that freedom has an economic dimension. Not only does the powerless enslave, so too does poverty. So no one is to forfeit his independence or dignity. One may not take a person's means of livelihood or as security for a loan or hold on to an item of clothing that they need, nor may one delay in payment to an employee. Like, we're constantly thinking about those people that are in a weaker position. How can we help them? This is part of mitzvah. Sedaka is not just giving the person the dollar. Sedaka is also the ability of caring for, feeling a sense of responsibility for the people that have less than us. It's not enough to just give the dollar. That's not what Hashem wants. If you have a choice of giving $1 to 100 people or $100 to one person, what do? You give $1 to 100 people. It won't make a difference to their lives. $100 to one person will make a difference. But we're not interested. It's not about making a difference. It's more about you exercising your muscle to be a person who's sensitive to others. Right? That's what we want. Dignity of difference. Another group of commandments is directed against interference with nature. The Bible forbids crossbreeding, livestock, planting a field, mixed seeds, the wearing of garments and mixed wool and linen. It calls these rules chukim, or statutes. The 13th century scholar Ramban understood this term to mean laws which respect the integrity of nature. To mix different species, he argued, was to presume to be able to improve on the order of creation, and thus an affront to the Creator. That's his tam. Each species has its own internal law of development and reproduction, and these must not be tampered with. One who combines two different species thereby changes and defies the work of the creation, as if he believes that the Holy One, blessed be He, has not completely perfected the world, and how he wishes to improve in it by adding new kinds of creatures. Now, I have a hard time with that as an explanation, because God created the world in a state of imperfection, and our job is to perfect it.
It also tells you how there are also laws how you can join two different plans together.
Correct.
To create something
Right.
different.
Right. Yeah, so there are rules, but this is the Ramban's. I think the point that he's making is that there's a sensitivity. The mitzvot are there to sensitize us. It's not about just do this because I'm telling you to do it. It's about developing a deeper, more wholesome human being, and that's his point. Number 4, from the outset, the Bible seems to sense that the journey from slavery to freedom is one we need to travel in every generation. So we're commanded to gather our families together every year at this time to tell a story of what it's like to be a slave and what it felt like to go free. Not just tell the story, but act it out as well. We eat matzah, the unleavened bread of affliction. We sample maror, bitter herbs, so we can experience the taste of suffering. And we drink 4 cups of wine, each one a stage on the road to liberation. We tell the story in such a way that each of us feels that we have lived through the persecution and come out of the other side of to free human beings, as if history had been lifted off the page, become recent memory. This is how we learn to cherish freedom. It's not about, we can't just talk about it. Something so powerful as freedom, you got to live it. So yes, I go through the whole entire story on Pesach, and I go through my kids. We were avadim. We put up in my house. We cut out. We take plastic tablecloths, like a light blue and a dark blue, and we cut them out into waves. And we line our dining room in these waves, and we're like in the Yam Suf, all Pesach. A constant reminder, like I want them to live that experience, but we have to make it real for them, because freedom is that important. You can't appreciate freedom without the backdrop of remembering what it was like not to have it, to be in shackles, right? To be confined, not to be free. Harambam in his 13 Principles of Faith, he says, I believe with perfect faith in the Creator. Blessed is his name, the Creator, the guide of everything that has been created. He alone has made, does not make, and will make all things, right? Not very clear. This is all of them. I'm not going to go through all of them, but you have over here the 13 Principles of Faith, right? I believe number 2 on top. With perfect faith that the Creator of the best is, there is no unity in any other man than His. He alone is our God. He was He who, and it will always be Him. Let's look at number 6. Why is that the first of the 10 commandments? Is that a commandment or is that a statement? Look at number 7. I am Hashem your God. The statement is a positive commandment. According to the Ramban, it's a statement, right? I am Hashem who teaches and commands you that you should know and believe that there is Hashem, and He is your God. That is to say, He existed before. From Him came everything by means of desire. He created the world because He wanted to, not by accident and the capability, and He is your God, and so you are required to serve Him, right? You cannot, any issue, whenever you're dealing with people that are struggling with their faith, don't worry about the mitzvah that they're struggling with. I have a hard time with Judaism because of X. That's not their issue. And you're not going to win that argument. The only question is, do you believe in God? And did He give us the Torah? If the answer is no, then don't worry about the mitzvah. Right? That's not their issue. The issue is never about, I struggle with Shabbat, I struggle with kosher, that's not the issue. The issue is, do they believe in God? And if they do, did He give us the Torah? Yes or no? Because if that is yes, then we could talk about the mitzvah itself and explain it to them. So therefore, Anochi Hashem Elokecha is the precursor. Do you believe first? Because the mitzvah don't mean anything if there's no God. There's no absolute morality, right? It's just going to be arbitrary. It's going to be subjective depending on the generation that you live in, right? So believing in one God, one source, is the key, the stepping stone, I'd say the keystone idea that holds the whole entire house of all the mitzvot together. Talmud Bavli, numbers 8. Even a mitzvah performed with ulterior motives garners reward. Rabbi Yehuda said, right, that Rav said, a person should always engage in Torah study and performance of the mitzvot, number 8, even if he does not so for the sake of for his own sake. As though the performance of the mitzvot were not for his own sake, one gains understanding and becomes perform them on our own sake. Meaning, even shalol lishma, even if you're not intending on doing something positive, do it anyway, even if it's for selfish reasons, because eventually, God willing, you'll do it for the right reasons. But if you have to choose one thing to do, more than any other thing, it's limud Torah. Why? Because the learning of Torah itself, if you learn it enough, it comes from learning and thinking into practice. But it only comes through repetition. To learn means to commit to memory, right? It's not enough to come to a class. The class becomes yours when you go home and you review the notes and you make it your own. When you take a piece of it, you say, I love this idea, you post it on your wall and you memorize it, or you mail it to a friend because it inspires you. It's when you take ownership over it, that's when it becomes yours. That's when it becomes real limud HaTorah. Rab teaches us that the absence of intent, lack of kavanah, does not invalidate the fulfillment of the mitzvah. Even in the case of shofar. The Gemara concludes, apparently, that Rava maintains that the fulfillment of mitzvah does not require kavanah. That is to say, if one performs a mitzvah, he fulfills obligation even if he has no intention of doing so. So therefore, you're paying your cab driver right now, okay, and you walk out of the cab. Are you aware of the fact that you just performed the mitzvah of paying your employee on time? Right? So some of us think about it, some of us don't. Is it better to have the kavanah there? 100%. Because the kavanah, the awareness, is what changes us. Do you still get brownie points for doing it? Yeah. But you get smaller ones. I don't want a brownie. I want a cake. Right? I want all of it. So that total full picture comes with your intention, your understanding. The understanding only comes through limud, through learning. Okay, that's what we're saying. That even a mitzvah with shalom lishma is going to bow lishma. A mitzvah without kavanah doesn't really matter. You can still get credit for it. You learn from shofar, but not according to everybody. The Chavetz Chaim believed he was very explicit that if you are not aware of the mitzvah itself, you are not getting any brownie points for it. No mitzvot. In order for the mitzvah to be a mitzvah, the commandment to be a commandment, you have to know that you're doing it. But Rabbi Sacks is taking this approach. I'm not going to argue with him. Okay, number 10. This is the last piece, and then do I have time for another two? Let's try. Edited from the letter in the scroll. Mitzvot mark a fundamental difference between Judaism and number 10, the life of faith, and the civilization of the ancient Greece, and the supreme expression, philosophy, and the philosophy. Philosophy represents the truth of thought. Judaism represents the truth lived. The Greeks sought knowledge of what is. Jews sought knowledge of what ought to be. So Judaism is a set of beliefs. It is not a creed. Instead, it is a series of truths that only becomes true in the virtue of the fact that we have lived them. By living them, we turn the ought into the is. We make fragment of perfection in an imperfect world and create a living truth, a life of faith. By keeping mitzvot, following the commandments, we help transform the world that is into the world that ought to be. The great principle of Jewish faith are creation, revelation, and redemption. But these are not truths we discover. They are truths we make real by living them. On Shabbat, we relive creation. Learning Torah, we relive revelation. Performing acts of chesed and tzedakah, we live redemption. We do not philosophize about these things. We enact them. Judaism is not faith thought, but faith lived. Judaism is not about thinking about it. It's about living it, right? It's not about just having a nice philosophical conversation. It's about the application of it. How do I make it real? By the way, the more real you make it for yourselves, the more real you make it for your families. The more real you make it for your kids, the more real you make it for your community. You got to live it. But we have a different picture in our mind's eye of what it means to have a Jewish identity. And we're constantly struggling with that identity. And then we find that number 11, the Nevi'im and the Ketuvim and Shabbat is the equivalent of all the mitzvot. Why? Because it forces you to be immersed in it. The only way to keep Shabbat is by knowing what you can't do on Shabbat. The only way you don't know what you can't do on Shabbat is by learning about the laws of Shabbat. That's the only way to make a Shabbat. The Shabbat is defined, is created by all the rules that tell me not to do. Don't do this, don't do that. All the do nots tell me what I can do. The do nots of Shabbat help me create an environment called Shabbat. The whole week is about me becoming, working towards something, and Shabbat is about being. The only way I could create a state of being is by knowing what I cannot do anymore. That's the separation that allows me to experience my Shabbat. That's what Shabbat is. And therefore it's the most important of all of the mitzvah because you live it, especially in our generation. Our generation needs Shabbat more than any other generation before us. Shabbat reminds us that the universe is created meaning that ultimately belongs to God, and we're merely its guardians. Adam was placed in the garden to serve. Here we're finishing up over here, protected, and so are we. One day in 7, we must renounce our mastery over nature and the animals. We see the earth not as something to be manipulated and exploited, but as a thing of independent dignity and beauty. It too is entitled to its rest and protection. More powerfully than any tutorial and documentary, Shabbat makes us aware of the limits of human striving. It is a day, if you like, of ecological consciousness. But it is also a day of history and politics. The Bible tells us to rest because of the exodus from Egypt and liberation from slavery. It is a time for freedom. The greatest freedom is the freedom but to be masters of our own time. On Shabbat, we may not work, meaning the one day in 7, we are no one's servant except God's. Not may we force anyone to work for us, nor may we force anyone to work. Even our servants should be able to rest the way we do. Tyrannies make people slaves by making them forget the taste of freedom. But no one who observes Shabbat can ever forget what it is to be free. Jews know more than most what it is to have spent long centuries in homelessness and persecution, yet every week, for a day, however poor they were, they gathered their possessions and celebrated like royalty. Shabbat was their political education, regularly reminded of their liberties. That, my friends, is what the mitzvot are trying to do. Right? The mitzvot are about us living in a world, living a reality that transforms us, that gives us a heightened sensitivity about the world that we can create together. How do we start? We start with over here. The greatest stumbling block is right over here. Okay? The way in which we overcome that is through education. The more you learn, the more the ta'amim, the more you understand the reasons why we do what we do, the more meaningful it will be. And Bezrat Hashem, the more likely you and I will be able to walk to Yerushalayim together and witness the rebuilding of that special, special temple. Have an amazing week, everybody. Thank you so much for listening.